How many of the great Indian wars of the American West ended with a true victory for the U.S. Army? We're not talking about a negotiated peace or a forced removal, but a clean, decisive battlefield conquest. The simple answer is fewer than you might think. The history of Native American resistance is often framed as a losing battle against overwhelming odds, a sad but inevitable defeat. But that idea misses the point entirely. To truly understand this chapter of American history, you have to look past the military outcomes and see the fundamental refusal to bow. A denial of political, spiritual, or cultural surrender that, for 7 tribes, became their enduring legacy. In this video, we're not just covering battles, we're tracing the deliberate strategies of defiance, from the legal brilliance of the Cherokee in a Supreme Court courtroom to the spiritual conviction of the Lakota in the sacred Black Hills, to the legendary guerrilla warfare of the Seminole in the Florida swamps. These are the stories of the nations that, against the full force of the United States government, asserted their sovereignty and refused to be conquered. Grab your coffee and settle in. This is the story of 7 Native American nations who simply would not back down. Part 1. The Unconquered Spirit, Enduring Military Defiance. The objective of U.S. expansion was clear: to claim the land and facilitate the movement of settlers, often relying on the Indian Removal Act of 1830 to push tribes west of the Mississippi. Nations like the Creek, Chickasaw, and Choctaw suffered devastating consequences of removal, like the tragic Trail of Tears, even when they chose compliance. This demonstrated that a prolonged, organized refusal, though dangerous, was often a greater protection of a nation's long-term integrity than coerced appeasement. The Seminole and the Apache understood this better than anyone, using strategic positioning and asymmetric warfare to force the U.S. to resort to decades of attrition, deceit, or brute, overwhelming force. The Seminole of Florida earned the title they still carry today, the Unconquered People. Their defiance wasn't one battle, but a series of conflicts historians call the Seminole Wars, lasting over 4 decades from 1817 to 1858. What kept the U.S. Army from achieving a clean victory was the Seminoles' mastery of the local environment, the dense, unforgiving Florida swamps, which turned a technological advantage into a tactical liability. The resistance found its powerful symbol in Osceola, a charismatic war leader who initiated the Second Seminole War, making an uncompromising commitment to remain in Florida. Frustrated by their inability to defeat the Seminole in open combat, the U.S. Army resorted to an act of outright treachery. In 1837, Osceola was captured while attending peace talks near Fort Peyton, having approached the location under a recognized flag of truce. This egregious violation of both military and diplomatic protocol caused immediate outrage across the American public and severely damaged the U.S. Army's reputation. The fact that the U.S. military relied on deception rather than battlefield supremacy confirms how effective the Seminole resistance truly was. Even when the Third Seminole War ended in 1858, a core group of approximately 500 people successfully resisted removal and maintained their hold on the inaccessible Everglades. Their descendants constitute the modern federally recognized Seminole tribe of Florida, the living proof of a successful, sustained refusal. In the Southwest, the nearly 40-year-long Apache Wars, 1849 to 1886, represented the final, drawn-out chapter of armed resistance. Many Apache leaders, like Cochise, eventually accepted reservation life as an inevitable means of survival. But the Cherokee Apache's refusal to bow rests squarely with a small, mobile band led by the warrior and spiritual leader, Geronimo. Geronimo and his followers absolutely refused to be confined to the reservation system, persisting even when accommodation seemed unavoidable to others. His successful use of adaptability and sophisticated guerrilla tactics against relentless pursuit by U.S. forces, including regiments under Generals George Crook and Nelson Miles, turned him into a legend. When Geronimo formally surrendered in 1886, it marked the traditional conclusion of the major Indian wars in the Southwest. The power of his defiance, however, lies not just in the decades of struggle, but in his final philosophical statement. Years after his surrender, on his deathbed, Geronimo summoned his nephew and delivered a powerful final statement of ideological refusal. "I should never have surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." That quote, spoken in the last moments of his life, proves that while the man himself may have been captured, the spirit of defiance could not be extinguished. Part 2. Sovereignty by Law and Principle. Defiance wasn't limited to the battlefield. In the southeast, two other nations, the Cherokee and the Shawnee, chose to fight the U.S. using political and legal instruments, asserting a sovereignty that was as dangerous to the U.S. vision as any warrior's rifle. The Cherokee Nation represents one of the most politically sophisticated instances of refusal. Their defiance rested not on military might, but on an assertion of nationhood recognized by treaty and codified in their own laws. In 1827, as settlers demanded their removal, the Cherokee adopted a written constitution that deliberately mirrored that of the United States. It was a direct, assertive act of sovereignty. When Georgia declared the Cherokee government abolished, Principal Chief John Ross took the matter to the U.S. Supreme Court. This legal war resulted in the landmark case Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, where the Supreme Court delivered a stunning victory for the Cherokee, ruling that the Cherokee Nation constituted a nation with distinct sovereign powers, and that Georgia's laws had no force within their territory. The Cherokee's legal victory, however, proved hollow. President Andrew Jackson chose to disregard the Supreme Court's decision entirely. Georgia proceeded to encroach upon Cherokee lands unabated, demonstrating that the political will driving westward expansion was willing to abandon the U.S. constitutional system itself to achieve its aims. The ultimate political refusal was the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. This agreement, which served as the legal basis for the Trail of Tears, was signed by only an unauthorized fraction of the Cherokee Nation and was vehemently rejected by the vast majority of the Cherokee people, including Chief Ross. More than 16,000 Cherokee signed a petition urging Congress to void the agreement. In a letter to Congress, Ross articulated the profound political refusal, stating the agreement was a compact in the formation of which we have had no agency, and that the nation was robbed of every element of freedom and every opportunity to defend ourselves legally. Despite this overwhelming opposition, the treaty was ratified, leading to the forced removal in 1838. Yet their historical, legal, and political defiance preserved the foundation of their sovereignty, leading to a 2020 Supreme Court ruling that affirmed the Cherokee Nation reservation remains intact today. The legal refusal of the 1830s continues to define their governmental authority in the present day. The men we're talking about were fighting for the very land they walked on, a principle most folks today can still appreciate. If you've enjoyed tracing the lines of defiance so far, take a moment and hit that like button. It helps us keep digging up these true stories of grit and conviction. If you feel like joining our little campfire here and seeing more history you can trust, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel. The Shawnee leader Tecumseh focused his resistance on the legitimacy of the process by which land was acquired. He and his brother Tenskwatawa sought to unite numerous tribes of the Old Northwest into a cohesive, organized military and political entity, Tecumseh's Confederacy. His core ideological refusal was the denial that any single chief possessed the authority to sell land, arguing that the land belonged to all native peoples in common. His argument was a direct intellectual challenge to the U.S. system of private property and treaties. Tecumseh posed the unanswerable philosophical question: sell a country. Why not sell the air, the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children? This sentiment denied the very premise of U.S. territorial acquisition, asserting a spiritual and communal sovereignty over the land that could not be fragmented or quantified. His death at the Battle of the Thames in 1813 broke the momentum of the Confederacy, immediately opening the vast region to U.S. expansion. Part 3. Ideological and Spiritual Refusal. Some acts of refusal were rooted in a rejection of the American worldview concerning land ownership and material wealth. For the Lakota, Sioux, their resistance centered on the defense of the sacred Black Hills, or Pahasapa. Their military resistance, led by war chiefs like Crazy Horse and spiritual leaders like Sitting Bull, culminated in the complete annihilation of the 7th Cavalry at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. Sitting Bull's distrust was deep-seated, fueled by decades of broken promises, leading him to ask rhetorically, what treaties that the white man gave to us they kept? Not one, justifying the Lakota's continued unwavering defiance. The Black Hills, guaranteed to the Sioux by the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, were unlawfully confiscated by the U.S. government in 1877 following the discovery of gold. This act confirmed the Lakota's distrust and became the centerpiece of their sustained political and spiritual refusal. The most profound act of Lakota defiance occurred in 1980. After fighting for legal redress for nearly 6 decades, the U.S. Supreme Court awarded the Sioux over $100 million, $106 million, in compensation for the unlawful taking of the Black Hills. The Lakota tribes have steadfastly refused to accept this monetary judgment. Their position is that the Black Hills are not a commodity, but Pahasapa, sacred land essential to their spiritual heritage. They maintain the unyielding stance, the Black Hills are not for sale. This rejection transforms the conflict from a property dispute into an irresolvable struggle over spiritual sovereignty. By refusing the money, the Lakota sustain the integrity of their refusal indefinitely, ensuring the question of ownership remains a perpetual legal and moral challenge to the U.S. government. The principle is best summed up in a quote attributed to Crazy Horse. One does not sell the earth upon which the people walk. Part 4. Defiance by Movement and Dominance. The final 2 nations employed strategic mobility and sustained regional power to reject forced confinement and assert their sovereignty. The Nez Perce, under the leadership of Chief Joseph, initially attempted diplomatic accommodation, but repeated U.S. failures to honor treaties, combined with a massive influx of illegal gold miners, eroded trust. When the government attempted to force Chief Joseph's band onto a tiny, diminished reservation, their refusal precipitated the Nez Perce War of 1877. Their response was one of the most remarkable acts of strategic movement in military history, a 1,170-mile fighting retreat across the Northwest with the intent of reaching sanctuary in Canada. This immense journey was an act of absolute refusal of the proposed confinement. The Nez Perce were intercepted just miles short of the Canadian border. Chief Joseph's military capitulation was transformed into an enduring moral and political indictment of U.S. policy. His famous surrender speech, delivered on October 5, 1877, acknowledged the overwhelming loss. "Hear me, my chiefs, my heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever." Chief Joseph weaponized his moment of defeat, shifting the moral burden onto the U.S. government by focusing on the long history of U.S. treachery. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and all the broken promises. By using his surrender as a platform to articulate the moral legitimacy of his people's cause, Chief Joseph turned a military loss into a lasting political document challenging the American conscience. Finally, the Comanche refusal to bow was fundamentally different. They asserted and maintained an active, aggressive regional sovereignty for over a century, defining the political geography of the southern Great Plains. Following the acquisition of the horse, the Comanche transformed into a powerful mounted culture, establishing Comancheria, an extensive area of suzerainty that encompassed much of Texas, eastern Colorado, and western Kansas. The Comanche were the dominant political and military power in the region, actively engaging in warfare and trade with 3 competing sovereign entities: the Spanish, the Mexicans, and the Americans. The very existence of Comancheria as a sustained indigenous empire was, in itself, a continuous refusal to acknowledge any external territorial claim. They weren't fighting defensively. They were imposing their will and economic structure on the region. The final resistance leader was Quanah Parker, who eventually made the pragmatic choice of surrender to ensure the survival of his people. Unlike Geronimo's deathbed regret, Quanah Parker chose strategic adaptation, navigating the shift to reservation life and attempting to lead his people into the white way. His later statement, "Now we are the same people," made in 1910, signifies a form of pragmatic adaptation for survival, a choice to pursue influence through political and economic means rather than military dominance. The evidence consistently shows that when conventional conquest failed due to terrain, tactical skill, or legal defense, the U.S. often resorted to violating its own diplomatic and legal standards. The capture of Osceola under a flag of truce and the presidential disregard for the Supreme Court ruling in Worcester versus Georgia demonstrate that the goal of total territorial acquisition often superseded national integrity. The legacy of these unbowed nations lies in the fact that their defiance, often sealed in powerful last quotes or enduring legal disputes, provides the moral and legal bedrock for indigenous autonomy and self-determination in the present day. Their stories are a testament to a truth often overlooked in the history books. The American West was not simply won. It was contested, negotiated, and ultimately redefined by those who simply refused to surrender their spirit. We truly enjoy reading the majority of the comments on our videos and hearing your opinions on these historical stories. With the Black Hills decision and the Lakota's refusal of the money, do you think the spiritual claim to the land is more important than any financial compensation? Or do you believe that a legal settlement, even for a sacred site, should be accepted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into Defiance, please remember to like and subscribe for more authentic history. If you like this video, be sure to check out some more history we've covered in the video in the top left corner.